Hello, it's Lou. Lou, just Lou. And today we're discussing horror games. And yes, I know it's mid-December, but please, shut up. When it comes to horror games, it's something I personally am no stranger to. But, as you may know, I am a massive fan of franchises such as Silent Hill and Project Zero. But today we're not talking about just them, we're talking about other franchises as well. So let's start from the beginning, shall we?
In the late 70s and early 80s, video games started getting their first foot in the ground, like with the consoles like Commodore 64 and Atari 2600. However, when it comes to horror games, one single game stood out: Halloween for Atari 2600, which was based upon the movie of the same name. It was well considered at that time to be probably rated 18, but by nowadays standards, it wasn't. In the late 80s, consoles such as the NES and SNES, as well as the Sega Mega Drive or Sega Genesis, became more persistent with horror games as well. However, games such as Castlevania on the NES and to an extent Metroid, according to online sources, were also considered horror games at the time. However, a game on the SNES called Clock Tower made its first appearance, which would be considered the first survival horror game of its kind, to my own knowledge. It's a point-and-click title which found yourself wandering around until you got chased by Jimbo here with scissors. With the beginning of the 90s, horror games started becoming more prominent. However, you may be thinking, it started with games like Resident Evil or the sequel Clock Tower. No. It was a game called Alone in the Dark, which actually came out on the computer instead of the major consoles of this time. But if we take a minute to step back, Resident Evil did also come up around this time, on the Sony PlayStation and Sega Saturn. Its second installment also appeared on the PlayStation, Saturn and Nintendo 64 as well. With the release of the Dreamcast in 1998, horror games continued themselves on, as it may have had its own exclusive like Resident Evil Code Veronica. However, in 1999 a new competitor entered the ring, known as Silent Hill, its own Resident Evil clone, as they would be known as today, but formed its own identity over the years. It was about missing children as well as cults, as well as weird monsters, and of course nurses that turned into those monsters. But this late era wasn't all just missing children and monsters. There was other games as well. Like previously stated, Resident Evil had two games on its different systems at the time, like Code Veronica and Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. With the turn of the millennia, horror games continued to thrive, as well as the consoles at the time, but not for the Dreamcast, as it kind of just died, and continued to live on as Sega continued developing games for other systems instead. However, Microsoft released their own console known as the Xbox, alongside the PlayStation 2. These two consoles coincided with each other with releases from Konami, like Silent Hill 2 and Silent Hill 2 Restless Dreams as well. In this era, games still started to make their own identity when it comes to horror games. With the release of the GameCube, another game showed up known as Eternal Darkness, which is the first Nintendo published game to have a mature rating on it, and a new system called the Sanity Effect, which can change your in-game views.
As we turn to the year 2005 and 2006, publishers like Microsoft and Sony went their own step with their consoles as they released the PS3, Xbox 360, and Nintendo Wii, respectively. And with that, they all went their own ways with specific horror games as well.
With the PlayStation focusing on original titles like Resident Evil and Silent Hill, the Xbox decided to go a different route by hosting their own type of horror game instead. That being Dead Space, where you're trapped on a spaceship and being hunted down by aliens as you uncover the truth of what happened there. However, we're not talking about Dead Space for now. We're going to move to the Nintendo Wii, as it has its own interesting game called Ju-On the Grudge, which is based upon a book and a movie of the same title. It's not exactly the type of game you'd expect when it comes to horror games. It's more a simulator where it takes you through the game instead. During the early 2000s and the late 2010s, we had other types of horror games show up, these being indie horror games, such as Slender the 8 Pages, which had you hunt around the map for 8 pieces of paper, while being chased by a man with long spaghetti arms who's also trying to kill you at the same time. Or Five Nights at Freddy's, where you're working a night shift from 12 PM to 6 AM and trying to survive not being stuffed inside a bear suit by the souls of dead children. During this time, you also had games like Corpse Party, where you're inside a school that's haunted and tasked to escape it, or a game like Yume Nikki, where you explore worlds inside your own dreams, but it starts to get a bit more crazy during that part in that game. The 2010s gave us more types of horror games like Amnesia, Alien Isolation, or games that force you to make more choices, like Until Dawn, or games that spawned from games that released in the 90s, like Cry of Fear, and imaginative games like PT, which never continued, and very hurt my soul deeply. As we tread towards the 2020s, you have other games that released around this time, such as Phasmophobia, which you need to go together to catch ghosts, or a game like Little Nightmares, which may not seem like a horror game, but it challenges solve puzzles to find out more about the characters you're playing as and what they're trying to find. And personally, I know nothing about this game, so I'm probably wrong.
Then we hit the 2023 Game Awards, where horror games in general have just not exactly been mentioned much, as we have no news on the Silent Hill 2 remake that was recently announced a few years ago. And where it comes from there, Resident Evil 4 was nominated, but that's only a remake of a remake of a remake. I wouldn't say that Hideo Kojima has once again graced his presence, as he previously worked on the game PT. However, after doing games such as Metal Gear Solid, he wants to try something new, as he did with PT. So he teamed up with Xbox, of all things, and is now working on the collaborative project known as OD, which I have quite high hopes for. And I'm looking forward to see what they do with it in the future. But what do we see for the future of horror games in general? As will they just die out the same as a game like E.T. for the Atari, or will they be reinvented again with the power of virtual reality? But until then, I hope something great will come from it, as a horror game enjoyer myself. And tell me, what's more horrifying than the horror in your own mind? Or the stains of your own sins? Or maybe the world crashing around you in due time?